Welcome to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast, where the goal is to improve organizations and serve students one leader at a time. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Jochum. If you're a department chair in higher education or any type of educational leader, and you want to improve yourself to better serve and influence those you lead, you've come to the right place. Because the best way to improve an organization is to improve its leader. Let's get started. Well, friends, welcome back to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. So glad you're taking time out of your busy schedules to enrich the lives of those you serve and improve your organizations by developing yourself as leaders. Today, I am very excited. We have what I believe is our first international guest on the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. We have Dr. Maureen MacDonald, and she's currently serving her second term as Dean of the Faculty of Science at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, and also holds rank as a professor in the Department of Kinesiology, directs McMaster's Vascular Dynamics Lab, and she's also an internationally recognized scholar. She leads the largest faculty at McMaster with more than 9,000 undergraduate and graduate students and over 350 faculty members and a staff in 8 departments and schools. So a very, very large organization that she overleads. Also, Dr. MacDonald, she became the first woman to lead the Faculty of Science at McMaster and has supervised more than 200 undergraduate and graduate students since joining in 2000. Her commitment to students was recognized with a National Mentorship Award from the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology. So, Dr. MacDonald, Maureen, welcome to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. How are you and how are things at McMaster up in Canada?
Oh, things are great here. I mean, talk to any faculty member administrator. The term just wrapped up here last week. So we're in that really special time in between the end of a term and the beginning of all the next thing, the list of things that you thought you were going to do. So we're kind of in that little honeymoon phase here.
I hope I got that correct. You are in Hamilton, Ontario. Is that correct?
That's correct. So Hamilton, if I'm going to be the tourism expert here, we're halfway between Toronto and Niagara Falls.
Okay. And I guess I'm also curious. Give us a little bit of an overview of McMaster. Obviously, you lead a very large faculty, or what some of us might call a college. But in general, what's the profile or the makeup of the entire university?
Yeah, so McMaster University would be similar on the categories you use in the US to be an R1 school. We're a comprehensive school with a university with a medical school located at it. We would be described as one of the most research-intensive universities in Canada. We only have, for the most part, public-funded universities in Canada. So we have around 37,000 students at McMaster University spanning across typical disciplines, but fairly comprehensively. Currently, we're depending, of course, on the rankings game where it's looking, but we're ranked in the top 100 universities in the world in a variety of the rankings and in some of the subject matter indices too. Interestingly, when you think about McMaster University, many people in the US, often the university they know, there's a few they know in Canada, and one of them is McGill. And so often they are confusing McMaster with McGill. I would say pretty similar history and size to McGill if people in the US are trying to listen and figure out where's the place for Mac. One of the main things that McMaster is known for is our Faculty of Health Sciences, and McMaster was the home of the problem-based learning approach in medicine that has now been replicated in many medical schools around the world.
Wonderful. Talk a little bit about that in case we have listeners that aren't fully aware of the implications of the problem-based learning model.
Yes, so the problem-based learning developed at McMaster out of some of the strength in evidence-based medicine, and it was a wholesale change in the way, almost 40 years ago now, they decided to teach medical school at McMaster, in which they did away with the majority of the didactic didactic lectures and the structures in medicine. They created cases, small group activities that were centered around problem-based learning, collaborative learning, shifting the learners through different groups and different types of problems that had many times interdisciplinary aspects to the medical problems and clinical problems and basic research problems that the medical students were using. And in fact, it's a completely different structure to most medical schools in Canada. It's a 3-year continuous medical program that rotates learners through theirs and then through some of the required structures for licensing, like the clinical rotations and those aspects. So it's something that's infiltrated through the rest of the academic programming at McMaster as well, and is, more prominent, we see, in many areas of academia now.
Okay, well, and that strikes a chord with me. My background is teacher preparation and curriculum and instruction, and certainly in our world now, we are seeing more of what would be considered problem based or outcomes competency based programs. And so, if we have any listeners on here, if that's been part of the discussion in your respective programs, if you don't know about that, we have a model here of a place where it's worked very well, not only in the medical school but across campus. I also like, Maureen. And I guess also for our listeners, is we connected at the CASE conference, which is a wonderful organization for fundraising, advancement, development. I believe Maureen is on the board, and I will tell you all that she gave a wonderful presentation, great public speaker. We'll have a link in the podcast to one of her TEDx talks. And some of you may know, but I have a background in speech, and I watch speeches a little differently, and she did a really, really nice job. And it's clear that she's a great communicator, great leader. So talk to us a little bit, Maureen, about your leadership journey, which I know will be hand in hand with your academic journey, but I don't know about you, very few people enter a doctoral program saying, I want to be a president, provost, dean. We focus on our content as we should, but somewhere along the line we get the call. And so talk to me and our listeners a little bit about your leadership journey.
Yes, Chris. And it makes me miss going to that conference. It's a wonderful conference, but I did say at it that I have never come across another academic who said, I've always wanted to be a dean. That's why I went to grad school, or that's why I embarked on my research. And I think that's something that we have to embrace. So like most people, I went down a sequential pathway of the disciplinary area that I'm in, as well as the opportunities that assembled to this. But Chris just described that this time of year, be careful who's in their office on a Friday afternoon, because a dean might come and ask you if you might want to take over a leadership position. And in fact, that's what happened to me, that I was on research leave. A new dean had taken over at McMaster University, and I got an email saying that my department chair was approved for a research leave, and would I consider being the acting chair the next year? I don't know what conversation actually had happened between my chair at the time and the dean that I was flagged. I don't know if it was like, Maureen's got to have this year away, so we think she needs to come back and do this. But I think one of the things I try to talk about is that there are so many experiences, if you pause and reflect, that for an academic, as with people in many areas, are actually assembling leadership experiences, leadership competencies. And so when you ask the question, what was the first thing? I don't know, like the first thing, what is that? But there are many ways in the job that I think you're assembling all of the parts that might become useful as a department chair or academic leader.
And Maureen touched on it, is there are many, many routes to your initial formalized leadership role in higher ed, which for some is a chair, it could be a director. And every university is different, whether it's a rotating appointment, whether it's permanently appointed. But towards the end of the academic year, oftentimes, certainly for chairs, is when we make those appointments, because the existing chair may decide to go back to faculty. They may decide to take advantage of a sabbatical. You never know, and we find that people come to this to leadership through a variety of avenues. I always like to ask our guests, then Maureen. We all have our content,
Mhm.
and yours is in kinesiology, correct?
Yes.
And that means we view the world differently, as we should. What are some connections that, from your training and background in kinesiology, were there some leadership connections that maybe before becoming a leader you didn't think that you were prepared in, but once you got in the role, you realized that you were well prepared, maybe had an unfair advantage because you had studied that in the content and you could apply it to leadership?
That's a really interesting question. No one's ever asked me that, but there are 2 aspects that I recognize and that I frankly lean on extensively as a leader. The first is part of why I was interested in kinesiology is that I have always been interested in sport and played team sport. So I played both soccer and basketball all through high school and at university, both in my undergrad and in my master's. And I noticed immediately, particularly in the department chair role, that there were so many parallels between different roles in team sport that were going to be helpful to me. And why I say different roles is that as anyone who's played team sport long enough, there were all kinds of roles. I was the rookie on a team, I was the bench warmer, I was a starter, I was the manager, I was the coach, I was the equipment person, I was the water girl. And I think a department chair has to be ready to be all those things at different times. But fundamentally, I also had the great privilege of having wonderful coaches. Um, and also being on teams where things worked and things didn't work. And it's always been an interest of mine to think about what are some of those key ingredients. And I think if for me, I do often look at the organizations that I'm leading or that I'm part of and look to see what's missing in the teamwork, what's working well in the teamwork, what's not working well. So that's the sport part that I find I use every day. A part that I use of my discipline in kinesiology, and this came up early on as me dean of science, because I did have some individuals in other areas of science, I would say maybe a little skeptical of whether a kinesiologist is actually a scientist and can they lead the faculty of science. Is that kinesiology, being a relatively newer science and having come from many times developed from a sport or education background, is inherently interdisciplinary. It inherently utilizes tools and approaches from other disciplines in science, but also other scholarly disciplines, and leverages those tools to advance and answer questions. And that approach I find also very useful in leadership, that you are not wedded to a certain paradigm or thought background, that you're used to working with people for whom you don't understand all of their training or their scholarly perspective, and you don't have that same perspective as them. And so it was, I found, perhaps a little bit more natural to me to be sitting around a table with a condensed matter physicist as the lead of that department, someone who is an expert in knot theory and mathematics, as well as our chemist, psychologist, earth and environment, all those leaders. That I could think, how can I be the connector and the thread that brings them all together?
Uh, Great point. I love how you articulated that. And I want to talk on that a little bit more because I have found, and maybe you agree or disagree, feel free to do either. But real quick, as a dean of a department that oversees physicists, those in math, my hunch is you've never had to write a paper for them, right? Right, but you create an environment where they can do that, and I think what you brought up is very is a very common. I don't want to say it's common, but having been in higher ed for a while, having been on search committees for deans, having gone to the forums when I'm at a college and they hire one, I do think, with the best of intentions, a lot of times faculty, if we have a college or a faculty, as you say in Canada, that has multiple subject areas, the ideal candidate would have a PhD in all of them.
Mhm.
But we know that isn't the ideal candidate. Just like in a public school, when I was in a public school, I worked for principals that never were licensed to teach what I taught, but they were still great leaders. And so I guess what I'm getting at is when we lead academics, and the higher we move up that ladder, such as dean, provost, obviously people want us to at least know or support their content. But certainly the president or chancellor of a university can't be an expert in everything. The provost can't be. You can't be. Um, so what are your thoughts, or maybe, I don't know if I want to say a reply, but if somebody, let's take it this way, somebody is thinking about applying for a job that looks like yours, and they call you and they say, oh my gosh, I'm qualified on paper, but I don't understand this one content. How can I lead a department if I've not studied that? It's in my under my umbrella,
Mhm.
but I'm a kinesiologist. I'm not a physicist. Does that make sense? How have you approached that, or what would some advice be that you would give to somebody coming to you with that?
Yeah, so I got some great advice when I was applying for this position from one of my mentors and a reference who's at the Mayo Clinic, and he'd been in lots of hiring committees, and he said, make sure you think about what is the elephant in the room and what's everyone going to have in the back of their mind as a criticism about you. Make sure you address it. And so that's first, I would say, it's great you're thinking about that. And if you're thinking about it, someone else might be. So please be ready to think about it. The other part he said is often those things, it's all in framing. That could actually be your greatest advantage. And so I have tried in those spaces to use the fact that I am distant from some of the areas to an advantage. One of the main things is, are you at least curious? And why I think it's an advantage is we're seeing now throughout many communities and societies and countries a fundamental challenge to the value of higher education. And that challenge, I think we need to respond to it by being able to engage in the conversation about what is the value of many different aspects of higher education. And if I can be a representative of that while not being a specialist, by being curious, working through that case for support of like, what is it that you do and what matters? And I can then articulate it, then I've formed that bridge in a way, and in engaging my departments in that, that if then they can trust me to accurately represent and also bring the conversation to them when it's beyond my level of understanding, that I won't try to go down and explain condensed matter physics, but I hope I can tell people why it matters and why we're great at it and why we need to do research and outreach and have students engaged in that area. Then I think that's better for my physicist, it's better for my university, it's better for our communities and for higher education. So there's a few things in there. One is just stay curious. The other is think about what are the criticisms of you as a leader and either make them a strength or figure out a way to address those fundamental criticisms. And if you can't, well, then maybe they're quite valid and you need to look at a different opportunity.
Wonderful advice. I often say that if you're a Brene Brown fan, almost every
Mhm.
podcast I mention her, but vulnerability is our superpower as leaders.
Mhm.
And what Maureen just talked about takes a lot of vulnerability. It takes a good leader to say, I don't know everything about everything, but I'm curious and I can be your biggest supporter.
Mhm.
And so thank you. I know that that helped people listening. It helped me. I also want to comment. I really like the first connection you also made to leadership essentially being a team sport,
Mhm.
because I think there are so many parallels that we can draw from team sports. And there are others in life. So if they're upbringing didn't include team sports, that's fine. It did. My life included that, and I took some lessons from it that were very valuable. One thing that I have found using that analogy, and I think this will go into what you have shared before about in a good way being hands-on with onboarding and hiring. I always say that one of the ways to form relationships and form your culture is know your roster.
Mhm.
Just like on a sport, everyone has their position. And if you put everyone in the wrong position, the outcome will not be as great. And the key is getting everyone in the right position on the field, on the court. And I guess I'll just use that as a lead in, Maureen, to let you share your thoughts about how you build your team and the extent to which you have found it's been helpful to be a part of that either hiring or onboarding process.
Yeah, so I got some advice from a former dean saying the number one most important thing that I could do was be involved in hiring, in forming that roster. It's a deep time commitment, and I try to do it in a non-superficial way. So I interview every shortlisted candidate in the Faculty of Science, and we've been very privileged over the last 7 years to go through hiring 50 faculty members. I do try to read the packages. I have to admit, it was a shock to me the number of equations in applications in the math and stats area. That those application letters include extensive number of equations that involve variables that I didn't even know were part of mathematical sciences. Um, but it's been so valuable because those conversations, reading the packages, engaging with people at that aspirational level when they're seeking the job. First, I feel like it gives me an opportunity at the very outset to set some things about our culture. I make sure that I read those applications and I remark to them on things that I noticed in their application. If they've revealed some personal information in there, I let them know that we'll take care of that. I tell them at the outset if the preferred candidate, what the negotiation process will look like, so that we can level set some of those expectations and we can hopefully bring down a little bit of the anxiety related to that. I also think that it's such a wonderful chance to start forming that relationship. I ask every candidate, and I'll reveal this now, what their aspirations are with respect to being part of our community in terms of service and collegial activities, and if they have any career aspirations that way. And then when opportunities are coming across, I remember them. The connection that I make after that is that I do this thing called lab meetings with the dean, and I reach out to all new faculty members after they've had a little chance to settle in and ask if they'd like me to invite me to their research group or their lab meeting so I can hear that connection point from what they aspired to do with what now what they're doing and how they're engaging their students and with their research or their activities. And our teaching stream faculty, I invite similarly to them if they have some space that they want to invite me to. And then I've had the privilege now over the 7 years to see some people that I've interviewed. I've gone to see them early on, and then their tenure and promotion cases are coming through. And when I take that to the Senate level, I can speak on that level that I know what I know what they were looking to do and what they're achieving, and I think it just makes a better advocate in their corner. It also, as you said, allows at least some touch on the roster and the flexibility and the events that take place. And hopefully on their side, it gives them a better sense of belonging that we know matters so deeply to how they feel about their job, but also to their success.
I just, you shared over or around 50 faculty positions.
Mhm.
That is, if you think of the schedule that a dean has on your daily agenda, that is truly a priority. That leads me into something else that you kind of shared with the pre-meeting notes. But you really, and I like seeing this. You said you've taken efforts to focus on the faculty's vision, mission, um, communication strategies. Something, I don't know if I've captured that correctly, but
Yeah.
I really like asking leaders about how do you set that vision. Uh, whether it's, and it all falls into the climate and culture. But do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that you've done in the area of casting vision and mission within your or among your faculty?
Yeah, so one of the biggest things is I've learned, and that's why I was so pleased to get this invitation from you, is that you need to approach leadership like a discipline. You need to study, you need to be open to receiving information, adjusting, identifying who are experts who can help you shape this. So, one of the biggest things is, like you, I think, Chris, I'm a student of not just the role I'm in, but how are other people doing this role? So when I see strategic plans that I think are outstanding, I download them and read them. I ask people how they develop them. So my assembly is an assembly of all what I kind of thought were some of the best practices. Some of the things I heard were uh, gather people together and ask them questions and engage them in developing that vision, but don't waste their time. Make sure you spend a lot of time thinking about how you're going to use people's time. And after you do that, make sure you circle back to them and show them, how did we use their input? How is it shaping? So I think those are some of the key things I saw. I also saw that one of the key things that people want from a leader is they want a leader to bring focus as well as values. They want to see the values that we agree upon in that space. And so that focus thing is something that's difficult. In my first year, I wrote all these priorities and all this stuff I was going to do. And in my second year, I actually said one priority: internal communications. Internal communication. What's everyone doing? What are we doing great? What are we worried about? Do we know what each other are doing? Like, do we have any degree of efficiency? And that internal communication then shaped our strategic vision. It helps shape and adjust it as we proceed. But I think I learned, without internal communications and thinking about communication different to different groups of individuals, and that you're not going to achieve anything. So that's why I really prioritize that in the developing the strategic plan and in all of our activities.
And so along those, Maureen, you did share, and this is no small feat in and of itself, that you've led efforts in strategic planning. Do you want to maybe elaborate and talk a little bit more about that? Because that's a heavy lift to do that work, but it's very, very important.
And I would say the biggest heavy lift in that is that I feel like it's like that question, if you want to do an icebreaker and you ask people to divide into two groups about like whether they bunch or fold toilet paper. Strategic planning, I think you can also say, we're about to do a strategic plan, and that makes two people, two different groups. I would say the biggest group is those who look for the door and see, how can I get out of here? There's a very small group of people who are like, yay, strategic planning again. And so the first step is addressing that. Why do people feel like that? Talking about how you want to engage with them. Then thinking about making sure. I was in a leadership program at Georgetown where Audna Johnston, one of my peers, all the time said, "Who's not at the table?" Thinking carefully about who's not at the table. And I found in university strategic planning, it's really students who are not at the table, students and staff. And so thinking about the different ways to make sure that student voices and staff voices are also engaged in the strategic plan, and just the iterations for that. I also had some great advice that one of the key things, you can't do any planning until you talk about your values. So a lot of conversations at the beginning about values before you even get to mission, vision, strategy, tactics, all those types of things, because you'll get tripped up over and over without that conversation about values.
Thank you for sharing that. I couldn't agree more with strategic plan, and I think that is humorous, because strategic planning is one of those words in higher ed. It's a lot like assessment. Is you have some that are like, "Where's the door?" You have a few that, especially people I work with, because our background's education, that we might get excited about doing that,
Mhm.
and two great things there. First of all, and I want you all to take note of this: who is not at the table? That is such a great question, and it really forces us to maybe challenge some of our bias, even with the best of intentions. Who did we invite to be part of this because we knew they'd be great contributors? But because of that, what blind spots did that create? And you're right, students need to be, that's why we show up at most universities and any type of educational institution. And then I also really value, I didn't mean to say it that way, but I value that you mentioned values. As you listen to this will drop before the fall academic term, and that is a common time for us to either talk about strategic planning, engage in it, and I could not agree more. Strategic planning, yes, it's important. But if you don't have your core values down, if you don't understand the basic ways that we're going to treat one another, what what our North Star is, strategic planning without that is kind of like, I don't know, planning the wedding before you even have the first date, right? I mean, like it's really out of order on that. And so I really appreciate that that you shared that. Anything then in your time with working with strategic planning and ensuring effective communication, is there anything that you can think of that you're proud of, that you were able to enhance or transform because of that process?
One of the things that I think, so transformative for us was once we had our strategic plan together, I had two amazing leaders in science who advocated for me in the implementation and advancing our strategic priorities. As one aspect was to gather a group of students. We gathered a group of 10 undergraduate students, hired them for the summer, and then hired them part-time through the year for the last few years, different students, and asked them to help us operationalize the strategic plan from their perspective. So they poured through the goals and the strategy and the priorities. They identified in groups ones that they would like to advance. They developed project plans for that, and with a unique student perspective, they brought forward our strategic plan. And I just thought it was such a wonderful way to not just engage the students in developing the plan, but actually operationalizing it. And it has been transformative for how students see themselves in the plan, and actually has really changed what we thought we wanted to do in that space in terms of the outcomes that we ended up doing.
That I have never, and maybe I'm sheltered, but that I don't know that I've ever heard, or certainly I don't think that's a common practice when
Mhm.
we write strategic plans. And it's not because we don't care about students. Uh, did you find that was among your network and peers, that was unique to then let the end user, essentially, because we're here to serve students, albeit through a number of ways, was that also seen as somewhat unique and innovative on your end?
Very unique and innovative. I've been really prompting the staff person who's been leading that group to write it up actually as a case study, and I'm hopeful that she'll be able to advance that. But yeah, it was just it's been extraordinary, and we see, and we just recently invited some of the students back because it's a longer process. We invited some of the original students back for a few of the celebrations where we had of the projects launching. One example is through one of the student-led initiatives, we established an Office of Undergraduate Research in the Faculty of Science to help elevate and amplify access and outcomes of undergrad research. And we invited some of the students back who were involved in that. We also had two Indigenous students who helped us develop, from a student perspective, priorities related to advancing Indigenous priorities in the Faculty of Science. And we had, one of their priorities was that they wanted to see more representations of indigeneity, such as an Indigenous artwork in our buildings. And we just had our first Indigenous art installation. And the student who initiated that came back for the installation, even though she's in law school right now. So it was pretty amazing to see the connected thread through.
I thank you for sharing that. I know there are people listening that are going to probably text, email somebody, a colleague, an administrator, and say, we have got to do this.
Mhm.
And those of you that are, kudos to you. I just, that's unique to me
Yeah.
to that extent, but I really, really enjoy that. A couple things as we close out here, Maureen. Uh, of all the things, when we approach them and say, do you want to take the plunge into formalized leadership, one of the things that gives them anxiety is conflict.
Mhm.
Do you have any, what would your advice be if somebody emailed you, texted you, and said, wow, I really want to be a chair, but I am so uneasy about conflict, that alone might keep me from doing it? What might you tell them? Either some advice or some things to think about to effectively address conflict.
Yeah, and I think first is you're not alone. I mean, I think I'd be really worried if we had a leader who loved conflict. I think maybe there's some examples of that in our world today that maybe are not the best things. So you're not alone, and I think it's a great sign that you are, that you're worried about conflict. A few of the tools are that it's a skill like any other, and there are training opportunities for this. Engaging in difficult conversations. There are books, there's training opportunities, and that you can approach those. I think the other thing that has been really helpful for me is to remember to view the fact of the conflict is typically not with you as the individual, Maureen MacDonald. It is with you in the role that you're occupying. And oftentimes it's not even with you in the role, it's related to the situation. And so if you can identify the core of the conflict, the why we've come to this, especially I think in academics, many people also want to go there with you. Uh, they want to have a facilitated discussion of why we've come to this space where there are different opinions or there are challenges on different sides of things. And so that has really helped me make a space to occupy there that doesn't feel like it's attacking me personally in some of those really core areas that then tend to activate you and not allow you to engage in the discussion.
Great advice. Thank you so much. I know people needed to hear that. It really isn't you as the leader, and I do think that if the only thing keeping you from pursuing a leadership role, formalized leadership role, is a conflict, Marie nailed it. None of us should enjoy it,
Yeah.
but you can learn how to do it. It's not natural to necessarily be great at those interactions, but there are books, there are seminars, and it's an industry where you can learn to address conflict because it is important.
I
Fine,
also
go ahead.
think if I could just add one other thing there, I had a really important conversation with one of my department chairs last week, and that is to remember, well, sometimes it might be you, and we're not perfect, right? Like sometimes we do generate conflict either inadvertently or because of, however we've approached something. But also, I think we just have to make sure we're making space to acknowledge I'm not perfect. You're not perfect. No leader is perfect. Let's all just have a little grace in there, and we can lead that way as leaders with others, indicating, oh, I wasn't on my best that day. I want to apologize for that. And can we try again? I find the more you can create those spaces, the more spaces there are like that for everyone to engage in. It just brings it all down a little.
Absolutely. Thank you for adding that because I'm the front of the line to admit that my people will never have a great leader because I'm human
Yeah.
and so it happens. And so you have to understand, you're right. There are some times with the best of intentions it will be us because we thought we were making a good decision. Any of you listening that have dealt with conflict, I bet you agree that a lot of times if somebody made a bad choice, they initially started out thinking it was an okay decision, right? And it just turned into something that they probably shouldn't have done. Finally, Marina, I always like to ask our guests anything that you're currently doing now in terms of professional development or hope to do that in some part will make you a better leader.
Yeah, I'm not doing this, but it is on my list of things. I really think that I need to work on delegation. I'd love to know more resources about effective delegation. And by that, I don't mean more delegation. If any of my department chairs are listening, don't worry, I'm not ready to like turn around and dump everything on you. But I know that delegation is a skill. I know that it can be better done than the way that I am doing it, both with my students, with my staff, with my faculty members. And I think that that's something that I would really like to set an intention for and do some work on, because I think it will help me and I think it will help all those around me as well.
That great topic for leaders, and it's never easy, but you're right, there's a balancing act because we can't do it all as leaders, but at the same time you have to understand that you have to be mindful of those we serve, because they also have things on their plate. So well, you'll have to keep me posted because on what you find in terms of a great resource on that, because that's something that I'm always trying to get better at as well. Well, overall, Maureen, I thank you so much. We've touched on so many wonderful things here today. One of my biggest takeaways is that leadership really is a team sport,
Mhm.
and we are all a team, and we are all trying to, I guess, be successful and win the game, whatever that means in our academic, in our environments. And it does take everyone. And so, Maureen, I would just like to thank you again. I know you added value to our listeners. You certainly added value to me. And again, just like to thank Dr. Maureen MacDonald. She is the Dean of Faculty of Science at McMaster University in Canada. Any final comments or thoughts before we sign off today?
Nope, just thank you so much. And I think just if you're on the edge here, take the leap. It's been one of the most rewarding the aspects of my career is to have the opportunity to add value in a leadership position.
Great way to end the podcast. Everyone, hey, thank you again for taking time to listen to us and to invest in yourselves and those you serve. As always, appreciated you listening to the podcast, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Department Chair Leadership Podcast. If you want to learn more about my leadership philosophy and how to be an effective chair, please consider my book, The Department Chair, A Practical Guide to Effective Leadership. You can find this and learn more about me by going to cjleadership.com. Also, please be sure to like this podcast, leave a review, and share with your colleagues. Thanks again for improving your organization and those you serve by improving yourself. Take care.